Good afternoon, Hannah.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
What are you drinking?
Peach drink.
Peach drink. And I think I have grapefruit drink.
Mm-hmm.
Sparkling water. Cheers. We just got done watching Dick Johnson is Dead. Literally mere minutes ago. The movie finished. We shut the TV off. Very few words were exchanged, and then we hit record.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we maybe exchanged glances during the film, but we didn't really say much of what we were thinking about it, I would say.
Do you want to talk about it, or do you think less said the better?
Yeah, let's not talk about it.
Okay. Well, in that case, I've got some bad news for you. The title, The Watch List, is in fact taken.
Oh, no.
I guess I looked it up before, and I was like, this podcast only has a few listeners. But it was a few listeners on that particular app. On Spotify, they have a few more and several episodes.
Right.
So I think we're going to have to go in a different direction.
That's fine. We'll do something more unique.
Well, I've got a few pitches for you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me hit you with these.
Okay.
And tell me your honest opinion.
Okay.
All right. First pitch. Bokeh, then.
I don't know if people will get that.
Plus, I don't think that's actually how that word is supposed to be pronounced.
Bokeh?
Yeah, isn't it bokeh?
Most photographers that I've come into contact with call it bokeh, but I also have heard bokeh, so
I hear bokeh mostly on YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe not that. Choice number 2. Subtitles off.
See, I disagree with this because you know how much I love watching stuff with subtitles.
But I can't call it subtitles on because then people are going to think that the YouTube version is going to have subtitles along the whole thing. And I don't feel like transcribing the whole podcast.
No, I know.
Or reviewing Premiere's auto transcription.
I don't think it really fits the vibe because then it maybe feels like we can't talk about foreign films. Or something where you would you need subtitles for that.
Okay, fair enough. Number 3, no direction.
What does that mean? Directing a film?
Yeah. Like our podcast has no direction because we're kind of just talking about what comes to the forefront of our minds.
Maybe.
But see, then I had second thoughts because then I'm worried people will think it's like an anti-One Direction podcast. Not that they're still super, super relevant, but
I mean,
I don't want the One Direction fans coming after us.
Some of them have good solo careers.
Okay.
That one's the closest. I think maybe a pun doing with cinema is closer to what we should be doing. Yeah.
Well, I spent much of yesterday lying on the floor trying to think of a film-related pun, and I didn't come up with much. I mean, watch list wasn't exactly a pun to begin with, but it was kind of short and sweet.
Well, it could be something like that. It could be an outdated form of media, something to do with VHSs or something, maybe. Or the video store. I don't know.
The video store?
I don't know.
Okay, well.
I'm just spitballing here.
Okay. Fourth and final suggestion. Okay. Pause it for me.
Pause it so we can talk about it?
Yeah.
Kind of thing?
Because I feel like that's something that we say to each other constantly while we're watching something. It's oh, pause it for me. So I can, one of us can mention a little comment or something or share our opinion halfway through.
We did that during Dick Johnson because you didn't understand what one part was about. So then I was describing to you what the scene was.
We don't need to discuss my shortcomings in perception.
I mean, to be fair, that scene was a little, it was a documentary handycam kind of thing.
I think I also just kind of zoned out. I was looking at his Halloween costume.
I mean, it was a big deterrent. Should we dive into talking about that film, or?
I mean,
where do you want to start?
Whatever.
Okay.
If you want to talk about it, I'll just sit here and sip my drink.
Oh, okay.
It's very hot in here.
It is very hot in here. We're recording during a heat wave.
Well, so once again, We didn't share our opinions with each other as the film completed, or really during the film. So I have no idea what you thought. You have no idea what I thought. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I can go first. So, first of all, I love the emotion behind it. Like, there's a lot of great moments where Dick Johnson was tearing up and having, like, conversations with his daughter.
He was glassy-eyed through most of the runtime.
Yeah, I mean, that's understandable, trying to cope with losing your mind, especially someone who was, like, a head doctor, you know?
Head doctor?
Well, was he a psychiatrist or a psychologist?
Dr. Noggin.
Yeah, I think he was a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So, you know, he specialized in matters of the mind, and to be losing your mind and like having watched his wife go through that earlier on in his life, he didn't want to feel like a burden.
Yeah. You could tell that was kind of his main thing. You know, he was like happy to be there, but they even discussed it. Like that was his main fear, was being a burden on his daughter.
Yeah, but I mean, it was nice because she never really made him feel like a burden. Like, I think maybe even the documentary was a way to celebrate him and celebrate his life before it ended.
Right. If you don't know what it is, Dick Johnson is Dead is about a documentary filmmaker whose father is reaching the end of his life. And so as a way for, you know, both of them, or maybe just her, to cope with it, they decide to film scenes of her father dying in various ways accidentally, not even really with a comedic spin on it, which I expected going in. I mean, I saw the trailer and I thought they were going to do it in like a really funny way. And so I thought the movie was kind of going to be a lot of laughs with a little bit of sad, but it was kind of the opposite. It was a lot of sad with a little bit of laughs, because the first time they do it, it's like in the first few minutes of the runtime, and it's really sudden.
It's shocking.
They just drop an air conditioner right on top of him, and it scared the crap out of me.
It scared me too, because I did not expect it. Like, I knew they were going to do that, but I thought they were going to set it up first.
Yeah. Speaking of setting it up, it had added context for us, because right next to the TV, we have an unset up air conditioner sitting on the floor waiting to be set up. So that's given me some extra fears.
Yeah,
getting that guy going.
That's given me some pause.
But it is,
I mean,
freaking hot in here, so we need it.
Yeah, for sure. Overall, definitely liked it. It's definitely a film with a lot of heart. It was definitely sadder than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
But you could feel like a true connection. Like, it felt authentic.
Yeah.
And it was sweet. And I think if you were trying to cope with the death of a loved one, I think it's a good way into viewing that.
Yeah. It was kind of awkward for us to watch it, because I feel like, well, fingers crossed, we're a ways out from either of any of our parents dying. So it kind of, you know, put some of those thoughts on the brain.
Yeah, especially because she's watching her father slowly over time forget things. That's got to be really hard, watching the man that you knew remember all these things and then it slowly sort of fade away.
Yeah, the scene where it hit the most for me was when the doctor's like, I'm going to give you 5 things to remember. And she says them, and he says them immediately. And then like 5 seconds later, she's like, okay, do you remember what they were? And he's like, and he could only remember like 3 of them. That was rough.
Yeah, it was definitely sad. Like, it felt realistic. Like, it's sadder than almost like any gory film, because the death felt real, kind of. And I found it really interesting that they did sort of a funeral at the end. Like, he got to witness his fake funeral, because, you know, most people don't have a big party with all their friends and family celebrating their life. Yeah. And it's just a funeral.
That was definitely a scene that I had a lot of mixed emotions about, because they play that scene, spoilers, they play that scene right after it's implied that he dies for real.
Yeah.
In the ambulance. And they frame it in such a way that it's not clear right away that when they're filming the funeral, he's still alive. So the funeral's like going on for a few minutes, and it's quite sad. But then they do a cut to a shot of Dick on the balcony in the church watching it. And I'm like, oh man, they must have filmed that reaction shot of Dick before he died, and now they're intercutting it with footage of the funeral after he died. Man, that is so powerful.
I thought that too.
And such forethought. And then like seconds later, it's like, well, no, he's not actually dead yet. And I was like, oh, well, okay then.
I mean, it was nice in one regard where it's like, oh man, I feel super sad. And it's like, oh, he's not actually dead. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was thinking the same thing as you, that, it was from earlier.
Yeah.
But.
And then followed by that, the trumpet solo of a lifetime.
Yeah, that was quite funny. But
I don't know what it was supposed to represent. Was that supposed to be a real song?
He talked about how they would play the trumpet to make people leave parties.
Oh, that's what that was.
And he said, I want you to play that at my funeral as a way to make people leave this party, kind of thing.
My lack of perception strikes again. I missed that part.
But like his friend did it, and then, Dick is right there, but his friend is still feeling all the emotions of loss and is like bawling his eyes out. And
that's something that I don't know if I could relate to. Like if I went to like a pre-funeral for somebody I knew, I don't envision myself getting emotional to the point of like feeling like the loss had happened already. I don't know.
I mean, how often is that going to happen?
Well, it did kind of make me, look ahead and be like, you know what? I want to have a pre-funeral because everybody, is going to come together and say things about me, and I'm not going to get to hear it. So I want to be selfish and have a pre-funeral where I get to hear everything.
Well, I kind of agree with that. I was listening to a podcast like that earlier recently about how like a comedian was talking about how her mom died suddenly and then her stepdad died suddenly, and neither of those times was she smart enough to like cherish them while they were still alive and throw them a big party and celebrate their life while they were still alive.
Right. So going back to my expectations really quick, I did think it was going to be a lot funnier. It ended up being, a movie about death. You got to assume going in that it's going to be a bummer, but
yeah,
I was kind of hoping out for a little more goofiness because like the log line, I even said it earlier, is like, this documentary filmmaker decides to film her dad dying in several different ways, but that's not really what the movie was about. The movie was about coping with his forthcoming death, but the movie wasn't about the production process of filming the scenes of him dying. Those were just kind of like peppered in
bookends
a little bit,
sort of, or to bridge the moments.
But that wasn't really the focus. And as as production people, I was looking forward to seeing how they were going to do all that, because like those slow motion scenes with the confetti flying and stuff were like so beautifully shot.
Yeah, definitely.
And I was thinking to myself, like, what was the budget for this?
Well, it was weird because they showed all these heavenly scenes of him doing all these cool things, having like chocolate from a chocolate fountain and stuff like that. But then when it was like the actual day-to-day interviews and like chatting with him, the footage was a lot rougher, which I didn't love. I don't know, if you're filming people for 30 years, I don't know, maybe
you left something to be desired cinematography wise.
Well, the cinematography was so good with the studio stuff.
Yeah.
But and like the recreations of the deaths and stuff. But her talking to her dad, I understand that she's trying to keep it light, and sometimes she would go to hug him and stuff. I like the authenticity of those moments, but I just found it slightly frustrating sometimes when like the camera would shake or like the framing would be really weird or stuff like that.
It didn't bother me that much, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine they just devoted the majority of their budget to those days when they had a bigger crew and they were filming those big stunts and stuff. which was super cool. I just thought that was going to be more of the movie, and I was a little disappointed because those parts were really interesting, and not only just for the spectacle of it, but to see him go through that and his reaction. You know, when he had the blood spurting out of his neck and, you know, the blood made his shirt get cold and he was all uncomfortable. He was like, this is worse than when I had my real heart attack.
Oof, yeah.
Going through a situation where, like, I mean, it's fake, but it feels as though his, like, neck is splurting with blood and he's about to die.
Yeah. I wonder what that must feel like to pretend to die.
Mm-hmm.
It feels pretty morbid.
Yeah, lying in a coffin as well. I mean, I have a bit of experience doing that. But again, that was more comedic than anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely was so sweet. And he had a great relationship with his daughter. And he seemed so happy to go along with all those things. And those scenes were some of the best parts.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just... Overall, I think the authenticity made it good, but yeah, it wasn't what I was quite expecting.
It was still worth watching, you know, especially if you're going through that or if you envision going through that in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of those moments, like the part where he was on the balcony in the church, that's when I started feeling some tears coming and started getting emotional. But I also loved the part where they were saying goodbye to the house that he had lived in. And he was like, oh, it's all worth it to spend more time with you. I would give up this house immediately if it meant spending more time with you, like his daughter. No question. I was like, oh, so sweet.
Yeah, that is such a nice dad thing. I mean, he was obviously so upset that he had to leave the house behind and retire. And the part where Kristen, the filmmaker, was like, we have to sell your car, you're moving to New York. And he started to cry and he was like taking it really hard. But he was like, yeah, I understand that it needs to be done, but it's really hard and stuff. Yeah. And I felt so bad for him because I feel like sometimes when you see elders and you're trying to take care of elders, I feel like a lot of them have more resistance to give up their old life. Mm-hmm. But he just knew it was what he had to do, but it still was sad.
Yeah. The sadder parts to me, honestly, were less about him dying and more about him continuing on life after his wife had died. Because that's something I can sort of put more into perspective because I'm like watching it right next to you, thinking ahead to a future where like I'm super old and you've died and I have to like continue on. Mm-hmm. And if I was in Dick Johnston with a T, if I was in Dick's position during the making of this movie and was face to face with two actors wearing giant cardboard cutouts of my face when I was young and my wife's face when she was young, dancing with each other, I would probably bawl my eyes out, especially if you were dead.
I mean, of course. I
wouldn't know how to come to terms with that.
Even watching the beginning of Up, I cry every single time. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I think in the funeral scene, there was a picture of him and his wife, like, dancing at their wedding. Mm-hmm. So maybe that was why they were doing that. It's like heaven to him is, you know, I'm dancing with my wife and I have new toes. Because he had, like, an abnormal... Or nab... He had an abnormal... I can't even say it. He
had some stuff going on.
Yeah, he had some stuff going on with his feet. Yeah.
Well, what would you rate it? You know, I mean, overall, thumbs up, thumbs down. I assume thumbs up.
Thumbs up, but man, I watch a lot of sort of darker toned content, macabre content, and this was rough. Like, it felt so real. Like, the death felt real, whereas in other things, it played more like a fantasy.
I mean, I think I would have liked it a bit better if they had maybe gone more into his feelings about dying, because I never got the sense through the runtime whether he was one of those people who's like, oh, death's just a part of life. It's going to happen once in a while, you know? Like, everybody's got to go through it, and it's just part of the whole experience. Or if he was the kind of guy who was like, I'm really scared to die and scared to lose everything that I have, you know? Like, either way, I didn't get either of those vibes from him. So I was kind of lost as to how he personally felt. It was more about everybody around him reacting to his death.
Well, that's going to be the people that are most affected by it. Mm-hmm. You know, once he's gone, it's...
The people that are most affected by it, I think dying is probably the person who dies is probably the most affected by the dying process.
Well, fair enough. I just mean grieving. I don't know. Like the after effects kind of thing.
Well, they'll be lasting, sure.
Yeah. Well, they had touched on like Seventh-day Adventist. So maybe he thinks he's going to be sleeping.
Sure.
Or something. I don't know.
I guess they technically did touch on that.
Yeah.
Zoned out once again. My apologies.
Well, she didn't make it clear whether that was his personal stance or not. They just said that he was religious and that was what that Christian sect believes.
Well, maybe we'll just have to watch it again to find out. You want to throw it on again?
Not right away. I think I would recommend it to some people, but it is pretty... It's hard to take sometimes. But, like, it's really sweet as well. So I think you have to be the right kind of person to enjoy it.
So rating out of 10 or out of 5?
I would say 4 out of 5.
That's pretty high.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was a sweet documentary. I think it was an interesting take on a documentary. Because we were seeing them over the course of a few years. But then it had, like, the stylistic bridging and everything. Yeah.
I would maybe give it a 7 out of 10. My default is to rate movies out of 10 instead of out of 5 and giving half stars. So 7 out of 10 or 3.5 out of 5. I guess I just would have felt invested a bit more if they had gone a bit more into his life preceding the movie, because I went in expecting it to be about the recreations the scenes of him dying, and when it wasn't and it was more about, you know, the actual loss of it, I was like, okay, well, sign me up, let's do this. But then they didn't give me that much to chew on as far as, you know, the life that he had lived. You know, there wasn't interviews with people from his past really, or like, you know, his siblings or the filmmaker's siblings. And I just wish I had gotten more of a sense of who he was before that. In fact, it seemed almost like they did more of that on the filmmaker's mother, who was long gone by the time of this film. That they went into her past and how, you know, she was reading up about like memory techniques and all that, and just would have liked to have seen that more focused on Dick.
Yeah, I think that would have fleshed out the documentary better. Like, gave us, I mean, he's such a sweet man, but it would have gave us more of a full picture and more of an understanding of the character and why we would be really sad if he died. Yeah.
It was also kind of strange that they did like a 1-year time jump right in the middle of it. That wasn't really explained.
I wish they kind of said something, but, you know, maybe they ran out of production funds.
Yeah.
And they had to wait a year to continue filming.
I mean, I'm just impressed that somebody, like, clearly that she wasn't doing this out of pocket. You know, somebody paid them to make this documentary, and I was just impressed that even happened at all.
Yeah, and then, I mean, it speaks to streaming services like Netflix, where they'll just take like indie filmmakers and stuff like that, smaller productions, and be like, oh, well, you fit the requirements. It's a cool thing. We're going to market it, and it's going to be like a Netflix thing. I think that's really neat.
Overall, I'm glad I watched it. I just think that the advertising for it, the marketing, kind of misrepresented it. Because if you're going in like I did, excited to see those scenes of him pretending to die and being like, oh, this is going to be funny, that's not really what it's about. Mm-hmm. Those are more just sprinkled throughout and just to give a bit of color to the story. And I guess that was more of a personal aspect for the filmmaker herself. I realize I keep saying filmmaker, but not her actual name. I think it's Kirsten Johnson.
Yeah,
Kirsten?
Yeah. I think, I don't know if she had an influence on the trailer, if that was Netflix. I think Netflix is very focused on clickability. And so a lot of the glamorous, really pretty shots were the more comedic things. So it makes sense in their marketing that they focused on the really great pretty shots of the production and less so the more dramatic element that was a little more like handheld, shaky cam kind of thing.
For sure. What I got, I wasn't overly disappointed. It just wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. But I would recommend it if you want to be on an emotional roller coaster of somebody dealing with their parent dying.
Yeah, I think it was worth watching. I feel like maybe I gained some wisdom or insight into how people handle stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So, true to our word on the last episode, we went on a little bit of a documentary kick and also watched Until the Wheels Fall Off, the Tony Hawk, Sam Jones joint adventure story starring Anthony Hawk as himself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was recommended this by our friend Gabe, who also watched the other Tony Hawk documentary released recently, Pretending I'm a Superman, which is less about Tony Hawk himself and more about the games. I watched that. Well, we both watched it, and I was a little underwhelmed.
Me too.
Just a bit, because I did quite like those games, but the documentary left something to be desired. And Gabe watched both of them, and he said that the one about, Tony Hawk's life and skateboarding journey proper, not just the games, was a lot better. So we threw that on yesterday. What did you think?
Because we watched the other one and we kind of thought it was mediocre.
At best. No, I'm just kidding. It was pretty good. But
I don't remember loving it, but because I knew this documentary was made at around the same time, I thought maybe it was a similar subject matter, and I honestly wasn't stoked to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
But then we started it, and then I realized it was more about like how we got his start and like upbringing and all the like early days of skateboarding and stuff. And then I found it a lot more interesting. I was like, all right, here we go. All these old pictures and videos of him like in the 70s at competitions and stuff. So like, that's rad. I was really inspired and loving a lot of the skateboarding like action pose shots. I was like,
the photography, you mean?
Yeah, I was like, oh man, how do I photograph like a skateboarding competition? That would be so sick. I love like the signature style. I would never shoot like this for my portrait photography that I do, but I love the signature style of skateboarding is the huge fisheye lens. Like it just like as soon as you see it, you're like, oh, skateboarding. So I would love to venture more into that. I definitely found that aspect really inspirational.
Yeah, I loved it, like the whole thing essentially, because I played the Tony Hawk games, Underground 2, Legend, which is one of the things that I didn't like about the game documentary was I kind of dissed Underground 2, and that's my favorite one, so I was pissed.
Why would they diss it?
I don't know. I don't remember exactly what they said. I think they were just like, the franchise was kind of losing steam at that point, and I was like, how dare you? But I always, as a kid growing up in the early 2000s, that's all that I knew Tony Hawk as was like, was probably in his 30s at that point, well-established, just like pro skater. That's all I knew him as. And then a couple of years ago, there was a video where he was getting a Funko Pop made of himself. And they decided to pick a particular era of his skateboarding life where he had like long blonde hair. I was like, what? Tony Hawk had long blonde hair? I just know him as like short brown haired, middle-aged dude. Well, not middle-aged, but
middle-aged-ish.
not a young guy. And so I started seeing pictures of him and realizing that he got his start skating really, really young.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's something that I'm interested in finding out more about. And so this documentary was kind of the perfect thing. And I think perfect thing is a great way to describe it because I would say we're relative documentary connoisseurs.
Good ones.
We love a good doc. But there's some docs that can only be so interesting because their subject can only be so interesting.
Yeah.
And for Tony Hawk, as a guy who has led I don't know if I would use the word privileged, but he's led a good life and had a lot of success and opportunities and not an insane amount of trauma or bad moments.
Well,
you can only sort of get so invested in his story as opposed to somebody who's gone through like some real strife. But that said, for a documentary about a person who's led that kind of life, it was like the de facto documentary. Like I came away from this feeling the same way as I did from the Fyre Festival documentary, one of two that I don't remember the name of. When did we watch?
The other one we didn't even finish.
Well, that's exactly my point, is there were two Fyre Festival documentaries. We watched the first one and I was like, I feel like this is it. Like, why would I need a second one? You know?
Yeah.
That this one told the whole story. I feel like I got it.
It was like Fyre Fest, the party that never happened or something.
Right.
And I don't know, but the other one had Billy the scammer on, but I felt like that made it more biased.
Yeah, I didn't want to
he was like the hero, and they had like stock footage while he was talking, and like what made the Fyre Festival doc so cool is because we were seeing it happening in real time. Like, it just completely dissolved and stuff. That was what was so fascinating about it.
Yeah, and so it felt like the documentary about that event. You didn't need any other one, you know?
Agreed.
And that's how I felt about this Tony Hawk movie, was I was like, this kind of answered any question that I would have about Tony Hawk's early days in skating and his skating journey. And by the end, I felt really satisfied from the story, with the exception of, you know, as a Tony Hawk game fan, they didn't touch on the games too much, but that's kind of why that other documentary existed, to provide more insight on the games themselves.
Right. I was kind of glad about that because we had seen that already, and I was kind of expecting that they would touch on the games more, and I was kind of glad that it was mainly focused on the sport of skateboarding and the competitions and stuff. That's something I didn't know a lot about, and I found it really interesting to learn more about that world.
Wait, you mean you didn't see MVP, Most Vertical Primate?
No, but I was thinking about that during the movie, because they did a lot of those competitions were in like deep pools with the walls, and they would do like the big kicks. They would do like the 560?
540.
540.
Also known as the McTwist.
Yes, by Mike McGill. And so I was thinking of that. I'm like, oh, they must have had like some little kid in like a monkey suit to do all those stunts and stuff for the film. I don't know why I thought of that, but I found it so impressive. Like, Tony Hawk, you know, yeah, he's led a privileged life. It's kind of like
relatively
Michael Jordan in The Last Dance. It's like he's like one of the best basketball players of all time. And it's like, well, yeah, he's living a privileged life because he's so talented, and
but he's also driven.
Yeah, in the same way Tony Hawk is driven and determined. Like, that's kind of, I think, what sets certain successful people apart from others, is they're really determined and focused and have tunnel vision to the one thing that they're really good at. Yeah.
It's funny the way that they were describing Tony's tunnel vision for, like, you know, improving and iterating on a trick, failing and failing and failing, and like tweaking in subtle ways, and just getting like more and more tunnel vision and more focused and more like upset and angry. And then when they nail the trick, you know, that cloud kind of lifts, and it's like, oh, okay, everything's better now. I related to that so hard for video games, because I'm not a skateboarder at all, but I get that exact same way when playing, you know, like a hard part in a video game, like in Celeste, you know, just like getting tunnel vision and making these like micro adjustments, being like, okay, I need to hit that jump like half a second later than last time, and climb this wall at this time, and then like getting angry and angrier and like throwing the controller. I mean, not behavior that I'm proud of, but sometimes. You know. And then as soon as like I make it, it's like, oh, okay, deep breath, it's all over now. You know, on to the next challenge, right? Yeah. So I actually really related to that. Not that my video game accomplishments are anything close to like a 900 or anything, but, you know.
Well, I think that's what sets, did I say this? That sets successful people apart from non-successful people is that they're really driven, and not everyone would try a 900 and do it and continue and fall over and hurt themselves really badly, and then keep on getting up until they nail it. Yeah. For hours on end. Like, a lot of people just would be like, oh no, I'm going to leave at a certain point. I'm like really hurt.
Or even to be doing that, like, in front of an insane crowd and presumably on live TV with like so much pressure on you and all these eyes watching you do it. I can't even imagine.
You would have to be a special kind of person to not crack under that pressure.
Yeah. I mean, it probably just provided him even more motivation because he's like, all these people are watching me and I want to please them.
Yeah.
You know? Thank goodness they gave him all the extra time to do it, like they were saying, instead of just being like, well, your time's up. Time to clear out and move on to the next thing.
Right. I thought that was really funny. They're like, the irony is if your dad was doing the competitions, you wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah. He was such a supportive dad too, you know, and like doing his best to like really support his son and be there and like be a part of his son's world. And I totally understand it, but it's so sad when Tony had to say to his dad, like, look, I need you to like not be around me when I do this because people are thinking that it's rigged because you're part of it.
Well, I mean, that's totally understandable. Even though it's not, I could see being that kid being like, well, your dad's like one of the heads. Like, that seems unfair. Like, and being mad because, I mean, Tony's better than them and they want to blame someone. Mm-hmm. Kind of thing.
From a documentary standpoint, I really loved the interview compositions. The fact that they chose to do the majority of them outside in daylight I thought was a really interesting choice considering how quickly daylight changes, you know?
Yeah.
Less so on a cloudy day, but like Tony's brother, they were interviewing him on like a really cloudy day with like tons of fog. And I was like, this looks so nice, you know, like assuming that the lighting, you know, played nice with them. And then the other people who were interviewed like in the shade, in the pools, like the one guy interviewed at the bottom of the pool sitting on a skateboard. I was like,
I love those shots. Yeah, those shots were brilliant because, you know, they're skateboarders. Makes sense that they would be near their skateboard. Mm-hmm. The best interview composition, in my opinion, was the coach. What was his name?
Mm-hmm. Oh, Stacy?
Of the Bones Brigade.
Yeah, the head. Yeah. I don't know if he was the coach, but he was kind of the leader.
He was a coach, I think.
Okay.
Because he mentored them.
Right.
Into how to be great skateboarders in competitions. Yeah. And they would have practices and stuff. Mm-hmm. That was the best composition because they had like the light behind him and it had all that pretty bokeh in the close-up.
Bokeh then.
Yeah. It was just like really lovely to look at. And I, as a mainly natural light photographer, I really appreciated the interviews being outside because that's kind of my domain too, is to shoot a natural light in nature. Yeah. So I was like, oh yeah, bring it on. Yeah, I really liked all those shots.
Yeah. I mean, me at my day job, we do a lot of interviews, but we rarely do them outside. And even when we do, we have a lot of like flags and diffusers that we put up, but
I'm sure they did.
Yeah. Well, it just inspired me to search out ways to do really nice outdoor interview compositions. I did notice the one time where it didn't quite pay off was they were interviewing Tony in front of a pool, but not like a empty skateboarding pool, but like a full pool with like running water. And you could tell that there were certain times where they used that clip where it was the intended effect where you like just see the shimmering water. But then there was one clip where the light was like hardcore reflecting off the water and like flashing.
It was like strobing. Almost.
Yeah, like strobing into the lens. Yeah. And I was like, well, maybe they should have put some B-roll over this.
I agree. Or tried to mask it out, or I don't know. But I don't know.
Yeah.
It was still overall great. And I absolutely loved seeing all the early footage and the competition stuff. That was really interesting.
Yeah. If you enjoyed The Last Dance, I think you would probably enjoy this because it was really inspiring, especially to see Tony as such like a small, skinny kid. And even I think it was Stacy who was saying, yeah, kids like him are like a dime a dozen. He, basically had little to no talent. But he was just so driven to do his best and iterate on tricks and find his own way of doing things that, they saw that in him. And it was so validating to see him come into his own as like this small, skinny kid. And then he beefed out a little bit and then he grew and got like taller than everybody. And then he just started like dominating. That was so satisfying to see.
He's just like winning competition after competition, just like on such a winning streak where he's like, this isn't even fun anymore. I'm just like winning and it doesn't I'm just going through the motions.
Yeah. But
I can't really relate to that. But
no, but it was interesting to see him struggle with that.
Yeah.
And speaking of struggling, The one thing that I didn't expect, but I maybe would have wanted to know a little bit more about, but I wasn't shedding any tears about it, were the parts where he was talking about like not being a good husband and not being a good father and sort of having like some inner demons that he felt like he had to get over.
Right.
He was very vague about that. And I kind of wanted to know what exactly it was he was talking about.
Right. Well, you mentioned like infidelity and stuff, and he had a couple different partners, so maybe he just was having trouble keeping a relationship. But it makes perfect sense if you're so competitive, you have such that drive about skateboarding. You're always on the road, you're always in competitions and stuff. Of course, you're not going to be a good partner. Mm-hmm. You're just going to have skateboarding on the mind like 24/7.
Right. Again, from a production standpoint, I really appreciated the editing and the music. One thing that stuck out to me specifically, like I had seen the clips of him doing the 900 at the X Games before. I don't know if you had.
I don't know.
It seemed new to you when you were watching it.
It definitely, that's the era of Tony Hawk that I'm thinking of, is like the early 2000s X Games Tony Hawk.
Right. So I had seen those clips before, and so I knew, of course, that he was going to nail it eventually.
Yeah.
But I was just impressed at the way that they decided to edit it, presumably for an audience that maybe doesn't know that he landed the 900 at the X Games. I feel like any other documentary would have shown like 2 clips in a row of him failing and then the clip of him nailing it. Because it's kind of like rule of threes, like, okay, tried it, failed, boom, there it is. But I was impressed that they had the balls to show like fail after fail after fail and like really get across how long he was there and how hard he was trying to nail that trick. It was storytelling over pacing, but in a good way.
Yeah, I would agree.
I appreciated that. They sacrificed a little bit of pacing in order to really get an idea across, and I thought it was so effective.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it was good because they sort of interspliced it with like people talking about it and stuff, so it still had like a good flow relatively.
I loved when he called his brother afterwards, and he was, or somebody called his brother and was like, Tony landed the 900, it's like a war is over. It's like I can so imagine
people freaking out,
all the skaters like cheering and being like, it finally happened, like so happy.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about this sort of briefly, that it's the equivalent to doing a triple axel in figure skating.
Right.
Where it's like extremely hard to do in competition because you're basically defying gravity, like turning your body around like 3 times.
Pretending you're a Superman.
Yeah, I guess. You're flying in the air and stuff.
That was a pretty weak sauce title for the video game movie.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's because you're sort of flying in the air, defying gravity.
Well, and it was a line from one of the songs that's in the game, but that didn't really apply to Tony that much. Like, I mean, it had nothing to do with the game, really. The line itself, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they had like other titles, but that was like the only one that they could get cleared.
Right. Well, speaking of which, the title of this movie, Until the Wheels Fall Off, I thought was a great title.
Yeah.
Until at the end, it was kind of revealed that Rodney Mullen was the one who said it. And then I was like, where's the Rodney Mullen documentary?
I was like, yeah, they took this brilliant line from Rodney and applied it to Tony.
Yeah.
But it was like, it made sense because Tony is so determined and loves skateboarding so much that he's in the same boat as Rodney. Like, they're peers. They grew up in the Bones Brigade, which I also didn't know that they skateboarded together from a young age.
I didn't know that either, honestly. Because I thought their methods of skating were, like, their styles were so different. Because Rodney was, like, a street, like, I think he was more so a flatland skater.
Freestyle.
And then Tony's a vert skater. I had no idea that they were, like, on the same team at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why they were able to get along so well. It's because they weren't really competing head-to-head together. Right. They were more like peers that they could work off of each other kind of thing.
Yeah. I bet you there probably is a Rodney Mullen documentary out there. We just don't know about it.
It's just not it's not like HBO or something.
That dude's like mind is working on a different level than everybody else that was interviewed.
I mean, he talks really slow and methodically. Maybe part of that is from a lot of concussions over the years.
Well,
but I mean, that's all right. And the funny thing that he kept on doing was he was literally moving his hands like the wheels were turning. Mm-hmm. Like he was constantly in motion, like moving his hands forward.
Yeah. Speaking of the wheels turning, we both remarked really early in the movie that the shot where they show the title on the screen, where Tony slams and then you see the wheels turning on the upturned skateboard and Tony's in the background, the videographer like gets real close to the wheels and you see them like spinning. We both remarked that like the videographer in that moment was probably like, "Oh, the shot's so freaking good!
I'm so awesome. Psyched!" Yeah,
but probably had to keep it to silent. Himself.
Yeah,
but I could totally relate to that. There's times when I'm out filming and I'm like, "The shot's so good!
I nailed it!" Yeah, I felt like that recently.
Yeah,
I love that. It's the best.
Yeah, so great documentary. I would probably watch it again. We watched it last night, and I threw on the 900 scene again today just because I wanted to watch it again.
Mm-hmm.
But it gave me more appreciation for, competition skating. And I was so grateful for the footage that they had from those old competitions. Because, like, somebody having the forethought to film all that
back then.
It was so worth it.
In the 70s, 80s, 90s kind of thing.
Yeah, because to have somebody interviewed and being like, Tony just took everything that they were saying and use it as motivation in his next run, and then you see the
next run, yeah, and he's like awesome. 13.
Yeah,
it was crazy. Yeah, to be able to see all that early footage of him and like photos of him like as an 8-year-old, like riding the rails of like his fence and stuff.
Yeah,
I really loved what they talked about is how he picked up a skateboard and it wasn't like the clouds parted. It's like he wasn't good at first.
Yeah,
but he just
who is?
Yeah, exactly. He just loved it so much and he was so determined and he worked really hard at it and he put in more than 10,000 hours into it, like over the course of 30 years.
For sure.
So I think that really speaks to what success is. Like part of it is talent. You need to have that in you. But a lot of it is just determination and putting your hours in.
Yeah, agreed. So about those old recordings, we always say that there's like two kinds of documentaries, essentially. There's documentaries about stuff that happened, and there's documentaries about stuff that's happening, like while the cameras are rolling. And the documentaries about stuff that's happening tend to be better because,
you're going along with the ride.
You're along for the ride, yeah. And we remarked when we watched The Last Dance that it was a perfect combination because it was about something that happened, like however many 20 or whatever years like before.
The 90s, yeah.
But it was also, cameras were rolling while it was happening. So it was the exact perfect middle ground. This is a similar situation where it is about, the past and something that happened and not necessarily something happening in 2022. But the fact that they were rolling cameras on much of that lent a lot to the production value.
Agreed.
Of it. And, just gotta hand it to Sam Jones. It was an excellently executed documentary considering the subject matter.
He directed it, he produced it, he DP'd it. It was clearly a labor of love for him.
Yeah, and it paid off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and having seen his YouTube series, that's like the black and white interviews, I know he's a really great interviewer as well because he's the type of interviewer that will say a simple question and then just let the people talk, which I think lends to why the documentary was so great, is he was able to just kind of give them the air to speak.
Totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Considering that he's a personality as well, he probably had a decent relationship with some of the people that he interviewed.
Yeah,
already,
that would make sense.
As opposed to like no-name director asking, celebrity questions and they're like, well, who are you to ask me this,
Yeah, I suppose so. Well, I liked that they had some of the lesser known sort of competition skaters there too. That really helped with the story to like keep things flowing. Was to get all these different perspectives of people coming up with Tony Hawk.
Mm-hmm. One of the most interesting ones, I apologize that I don't remember the guy's name, but it was the guy who was smoking and was wearing that sort of green jacket and, he had all those tattoos. And he comes on screen.
Was, like, mean?
Yeah, he comes on screen talking about, he's ragging on Tony and you're like, oh, this guy, get him out of here. Was his name
Rodney? No,
it wasn't Rodney.
No. I don't know. Yeah.
He's like, oh, Tony Hawk, like not respecting him. And I'm like, get him out of here. And then he wasn't on screen for like a good 30 minutes, I would say. And when he came back, I was like, oh, this guy again, get him out of here. Yeah. And then he told the story about, being disrespectful to Tony when Tony's dad died. And then thinking that Tony was going to throw it back in his face when his son died. And then instead, Tony like took him aside and was like, you know, I'm really sorry that happened, you know, and that changed the tune of that guy. I was like, this is such effective storytelling that this guy is introduced as a villain. And then you know, slowly over the course of the documentary, see a softer side to him. That was one of the things that I thought this documentary did really well. It was like crafting characters.
Agreed. Yeah.
Introducing people. I mean, of course, I don't remember any of their names, but there's where that lack of...
he was like the freestyle skater type thing.
Yeah, that's where that lack of perception on my part comes back in. But, you know, you see somebody on camera and then they do like a cut or a fade to footage of them, you know, back in the day. It really helped create personalities through the filmmaking of everybody on the Bones Brigade and everybody that was involved in that time, you know. So it was really effective in doing that. It was great.
And I love that they had like the home video footage of them like doing like cool tricks and skits and stuff. That was so fun.
For sure. So rating out of 10 or 5, if that strikes your fancy?
That's tough. I would say it was maybe a more solid document. I don't know. It was such a different documentary than Dick Johnson.
It was a better documentary. Let's just face it.
Yeah. I would agree with that because it's you're learning about someone that's like the best in his field kind of thing and rise from the ashes and his upbringing and stuff.
I mean, it was more entertaining for one. I was pretty antsy during Dick Johnson because I was like, okay, let's, you know, what are we doing here?
Yeah, but that's true.
Tony Hawk, for the most part, kept the pace rolling and stayed very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe like 9 out of 10.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I think I would maybe also give it a 9, which it feels high, but I enjoyed it. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. Like I've always had sort of an appreciation for skateboarding, but I'm not good at skateboarding. So I was like, ooh, this is like really cool to learn about. So
yeah. If any of you out there know of a Rodney Mullen documentary, please send the title our way because I'm interested in knowing more about that guy.
For sure. Is there any other documentaries that are sort of top of your list right now?
Well, we went on a big documentary kick several months ago. We watched Free Solo, one of the Firefest documentaries.
The list goes on.
We watched Chicken People.
Yeah, that was funny.
That was excellent.
We discussed watching My Octopus Teacher, but we never ended up watching it.
So, short list of documentaries is My Octopus Teacher. My mom mentioned a Bee Gees documentary and a Tina Turner documentary. Did I say Teeny Turner?
Turner.
Big Turner. Big Tina Turner documentary. I'm less interested in Tina Turner, but maybe I'll gain more appreciation for her after the documentary. But I don't know, like, if we're going to watch one next, maybe coming off of the Tony Hawk doc, we might search for a Rodney Mullen one. But as far as what's next on our actual watch list, the not name of this podcast, we talked about watching some Denis Villeneuve movies.
That's true, yeah. That's a director that I want to know more about. I'm not sure if I have seen any of his films before.
I thought you had seen one, because I've seen Enemy, which I thought was great. I have not seen Prisoners, even though my brother keeps telling me to watch it. Years and years and years have gone by of him telling me to watch it. But to be fair, years and years and years have gone by of me telling him to watch Death Proof, which we watched recently, and he has still not watched it. So I'll watch Prisoners when he watches Death Proof. And then I've seen... not Annihilation. Oh, gosh. What is it? Arrival? I've seen Arrival, and I've seen Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of those.
Okay.
Did he do a Bond movie?
I don't think so. Well, because I know we should definitely start with Enemy, because I've seen it, and I think you would find it interesting, and we're already self-proclaimed Jake Gyllenhaal fans. We went
until he gets canceled.
Well, yeah. If Jake Gyllenhaal is canceled by the time you listen to this, I have never liked him. He is not talented. He's ugly downright, and just I've hated every movie that he's ever been in. If he's not canceled, he's so talented. I just love him.
He's a good actor.
So handsome, too.
Yeah. Nightcrawler, really good in that.
Right. So, we watched Nightcrawler recently. We also watched Brokeback Mountain within the past couple of years. And we have quite the appreciation for Jake Gyllenhaal. I would maybe list him among my favorite actors. But part of that is because I've seen Enemy, and I thought he was great in it. So that's why I want you to watch it, because I think you'll find it interesting.
Okay.
It's a little avant-garde, just a little bit.
Well, I like avant-garde.
But definitely we got to watch Arrival. Arrival I saw in theaters, and I haven't seen it since, so I really want to watch it again.
I'm interested. I know it's a sci-fi movie, which makes me maybe a little bit less interested, but I've heard that it's good. It's
not too out there with its sci-fi. Like, it's not Blade Runner 2049 sci-fi. Mm-hmm. It's a little more grounded.
Well, actually, I was kind of stoked about Blade Runner because I've heard that it's good and it's stylistic, and that was the appeal of the original Blade Runner, is everyone talked about how great the cinematography was. And
well, similar situation to Trainspotting 2 that we talked about last time. I actually liked Blade Runner 2049 significantly more than I liked the original Blade Runner, and that's because I didn't like the original Blade Runner very much at all.
It was not what I thought it would be.
I don't think it holds up.
No.
It's to me, it's the textbook definition of style over substance.
Sometimes that can be fine, but I felt like maybe even the style didn't hold up as much over the years.
If I'll kind of hold my opinion on the original Blade Runner in my pocket. If anyone wants to come onto this podcast, anyone that we know specifically, not a complete stranger, if anyone wants to come onto this podcast and contest the fact that the original Blade Runner does not hold up and is not that great, feel free. But until then, I am not a fan.
There's many reasons that I'm sure we could get into at some point.
We'll have a specific episode all about Blade Runner. Maybe when you and I, because I've seen Blade Runner 2049, of course. When you watch it, maybe we'll have a whole episode dedicated to both Blade Runners, and we'll see if anyone wants to come on to contest their opinion on the first one.
For sure.
Yeah. So looking forward, I think I'm pretty primed to watch Enemy at this point. I think it takes place in Toronto too, so Canadian connection.
For sure. I mean, the title deters me because it sounds, to me, I don't know why, it sounds kind of boring.
Okay, well, yeah, let's get into it. Like, what are your expectations? Do you know anything about it?
I don't know. I feel like maybe I've seen the poster where it's like Jake Gyllenhaal on like a dark city street, and it just says like Enemy.
I think you're thinking of the Nightcrawler poster.
No, I like that poster. I don't know. I don't know. I've never like really heard anything about it.
Do you know anything about the plot?
No.
Okay.
But let's leave it at that, because sometimes it's nice to go into a movie not knowing anything at all and being blown away.
I'm not going to say anything, but I will ask, in your wildest, ideas, what do you think the movie is going to be about?
Okay. Here is my fake synopsis.
Yeah.
He
who?
Jake Gyllenhaal.
Is he in it?
Yes.
In your synopsis?
Yes.
Okay, go on.
He lives in Toronto, and someone frames him for a crime. Frames him for murder, let's see. And, he gets in trouble, and he becomes like the public enemy kind of thing. And he has to kind of set his story straight, like make people like favor him again, and kind of like find out who's doing this to him. Mm-hmm. Maybe something like that.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, you pretty much got every detail correct. I mean, no, I'm just kidding.
Well, you wouldn't. I don't think you would want to ruin anything for me. But, I mean, that's just, I have no idea what it's about, so that's just blue sky.
That's a pretty good, I mean, I'm not saying it's a pretty good guess, because I don't want to give away whether it's, like, close or far from reality, but I will say, like, that's a good interpretation of the title, having known nothing about it.
Yeah. It's like, I'm your enemy now. I don't know.
Who's saying that?
I'm just thinking of like the Elephant Man. You know, like I'm not a monster. Kind of. I don't know.
Does he say that?
He's the enemy of himself.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Right.
Which maybe we should watch The Elephant Man as well.
He's the enemy of himself. Interesting. Okay, well, I am less primed to watch Elephant Man, but Enemy, sure, let's throw it on. Enemy and maybe Arrival.
There's also another documentary that I'm interested in.
Go on.
I think it's called Imposter.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah, you've talked about it before.
Yeah.
Sort of the log line of a guy or like a child is missing and then he comes back as an adult, but he doesn't really look like the child, but then they kind of go along with it, but it's like, why would they go along with it?
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in that sort of log line.
Yeah. You will probably really like that documentary.
So is that like a documentary where it's like it's happening while it's being filmed?
No.
It's like archival footage.
It confused me at first. I watched it with my brother, and he put it on without. I think it was one of those times where he was like, I'm going to put on a movie, and I'm not going to tell you the title. I'm not going to tell you anything about it, genre or whatever. I'm just going to put it on. So he put it on.
That's fun.
And this isn't a spoiler to say, but it starts with a scene, like a filmed, scripted scene, right? And so I was like, oh, this is like a narrative, like a written narrative movie, because that's what it looked like. And then a few minutes into the scene, it cuts to an interview. And I was like, wait, is it a documentary? Maybe it's like a fake documentary. So long story short, it's one of those documentaries where there isn't really that much archival footage.
Okay. It's like a recreation.
But they recreate it, yeah.
Okay.
Some of the stuff.
I'm not sure if I like that.
It's not.
We'll see.
I wouldn't say the vast majority of it is recreated.
Right.
But this was also several years ago that I last saw it. But
maybe we should give it a rewatch.
Yeah.
Or you should give it a rewatch.
It's more about the story than the visuals anyway. But
for sure.
Yeah. Get ready to be taken on a ride.
Yeah. Well, that's the documentaries that I love is I don't know what's happening. And I'm along with the ride with the documentarians like Catfish, where it's like, where is this going? kind of thing. So I'm stoked for that.
All right. So short list is Enemy, Arrival, Imposter, Rodney Mullen documentary.
Sounds good.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. I don't know if it ended up being quite as long as our intended 10-minute episode that was the intro that ended up being over an hour, but
we had a lot to say.
Oh, well, good thing we're doing a podcast.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.
Peace out.